Hi, everyone. This is Andrew Unkefer. Welcome to my third episode of my interview with Gary Shulte. Gary has had a star-studded career where he's rubbed shoulders with the legends of the insurance and financial services industry. Today, we're going to explore a little further and dig into more of what he's learned. We're going to explore his book that he's recently released. It's called From Irrelevant to Indispensable. And this was co-authored with a lifetime member of the Top of the Table, Rao Garudo. Gary, welcome to our interview today.
Thank you, Andy. Glad to be here.
You know, I'm intrigued by the name, From Irrelevant to Indispensable. It's an interesting title. Does this tell you a little bit about why you wrote the book?
It's really the heart of the issue. As you know, by my previous interviews, I fancy myself a bit of an industry historian because probably the only guy still active and working and engaged that was around in the late 60s. And what we did, the reason the book was written is to remind us of our origins and how we lost them, how we actually became relevant and then gave up our relevance. And in a nutshell, the way we became relevant is after World War II, people had this thing called disposable income, and we began doing planning. And the first planning organization was called IDS. If anybody remembers them, they are now Ameriprise, and they invented financial planning. We did it with life insurance before that, but the solution was always the same: a life insurance policy. So IDS changed that in the industry. And we began doing needs-based selling and asking questions. And we learned that we sell by asking questions. We learned that if we shut our mouth and listen, people will tell us what they want and how we're going to give it to them. We don't have to dig it out of them. They'll tell us. We learned that no one ever lost a sale by listening too much. So those lessons back in the 60s and 70s were invaluable. And we, in fact, became somewhat indispensable to our clients. We were financial advisors. We usually got our mutual fund license and did some of that. We sold annuities, which were starting to come into play. And then two things happened coincidentally at the same time that changed everything. The first thing is in 1980, when I happened to be the chief marketing officer at Protective Life, a job I frankly BS my way into at 33. I don't know how I did it, but yeah. And I had a wonderful, wonderful experience with wonderful people. It's a great company. But the first thing that happened is that I learned, I get up behind my desk and now I'm a chief marketing officer, and prime hit 20%. And there was what is known as disintermediation. And people were just pulling the money out of their life insurance policies, which were who would get 4% or 5% if you can get 18 or something like that with a government bond. So we were in free fall, the industry. The thing that we came up with was to get rid of what were called portfolio products, and based on the overall performance of the bonds and mortgages they held, and go into what are called direct recognition products, which are what we've sold pretty much since. And then you would invest new money at the new rates, and you could credit that universal life policy. We were one of the first companies to have universal life, and dig yourself out of the hole. What happened then were two things. First, we went from selling the problems, the need, the relationship, and all of the things that make us necessary. We had become indispensable to a lot of our clients, to selling numbers, and all we had to do, we didn't even have to prospect, just find somebody that owned life insurance and say, do you have the old kind or the new kind? What do you mean? Well, would you like to get twice as much life insurance for the same premium, or the same amount of life insurance for half of the premium? You choose. And that's what Universal Life did. And it let us pick the interest rate. I used to say that we sell the only product that's as good as we're willing to say it is. And we were willing to say it was pretty darn good back then. The second thing that happened in this era of, first of all, how could you, and this is all in the book, and save you the trouble of reading it, but there's a lot more there. How could you justify taking a moment in history where prime rates spiked out of control and extrapolate it over the lifetime of the longest term financial purchase anybody makes. How could you do that? We show a 30-year-old a 40-year projection or a 30-year projection. It was ridiculous. But we were saved by the bell, and I should say saved by Big Blue, because something happened at the same time. They learned to generate computerized illustrations. Before that, I mean, I'm showing my age here, but we got a tic-tac-toe on a yellow pad, or we had our assistant type something up on an IBM typewriter for credibility. But mostly what I sold was just a tic-tac-toe and now all of a sudden we had something with the company's name on it: Equitable, New York Life, Protective. And it would illustrate these wonderful numbers in beautiful columns up and down. And all of a sudden, for the first time, the consumer said, this guy isn't BSing me. He's not making these numbers up. They're there with the company. So that is a long explanation of the two things that happened that changed our industry forever. And, we didn't have to prospect, because we could say, do you want the same insurance for half the premium or twice as much for the same premium? Then we would show them these ridiculous illustrations, and we kind of lost our way. And we, ever since then, have never quite gotten back to what we were in my previous interview. I talked about the Connecticut General and the way they train people. So that's the core reason we wrote the book, is that we've got to get back to becoming indispensable. And the ally we had, which was technology that created those frankly bogus illustrations 40 years ago, is now our enemy, because it is creating everything that needs to be created as authentically as you could possibly imagine it online. And we are no longer necessary unless we learn the importance of going back to relationship building. So that's what the book is about. How do you make yourself indispensable? And the answer is by the spoken word, not by the illustrated number.
So you just made me think of a few great points while you were talking there. That moment, I remember the first illustrations we were running in the annuity industry, when we finally had the minds of the actuaries coming and being able to apply that directly to a printout that had to do with the client's own life and their life expectancy. That was sort of an unbelievable innovation at the time, to customize something for somebody to that level. But it also began that price comparison that you talked about. Now we can get just as much for half the price, or twice as much for the same price. So now it started to move to become a commodity, and we lost our way with the advice. And technology was a catalyst for that. So, and I know your book lays a lot of blame on technology, but you also place some heavy burdens on the agents for this movement from being relevant to becoming irrelevant. And it's not just all technology, but America has seen an incredible technology revolution, where many of us are working in jobs we would have never imagined before, or jobs that we thought were here to stay are long gone. What does that mean for the agent? I hear about robo-advice. I hear about these new planning models. What's the lesson we could take from the past that we can draw from now?
Well, it's more timely than ever, Andy, because as you and I sit through this interview, we are leveraging technology in a way we never dreamt possible. I used to have to fly to Colorado to visit you and sit in a room and do a movie or whatever they call it. Now we can do this. And so the key is the human element. I think I quoted someone recently. It was a philosopher named Alpha A, whatever that means. But she said, it was within the words he didn't speak that I found the answers to my questions. And that's what you have to do, is be interpretive, because machinery can't be interpretive. It can't. You got to be able to read a person's face and ask them the tough questions. Two things I'll say about this. Number one, everybody has always said, oh, this is a relationship business. It's all about relationships. Relationships mean everything. I don't think they really understand that relationships, all relationships that are good relationships, are based on one thing, and that is on something each party cannot easily get elsewhere. It's a selfish thing in most cases. I couldn't find my best friend if my life depended on it again. He's just the most wonderful person I know. And I've never met anyone like him. I couldn't find anyone like my wife again in a million years. I couldn't find anyone like the people who trained and mentored and coached me. Those are relationships. Well, you got to have that kind of a bond with the client. They've got to know that you're the go-to person for not just financial advice, but when they invite you to their anniversary or their kid's bar mitzvah or some important event in their life, then you've got a relationship, and it's impervious to assault by other people that are just showing bigger numbers. And we have to get back to that. And it isn't easy to do, but the reason I blame agents is that they've been a little bit lazy producers. It's a lot easier to sell greed than it is to sell need. But need's what sticks, need's what really matters. Because greed can always be outgreeded. Somebody can always leapfrog you if you're selling numbers. So we've got to get back to it, and that's what the book is about. It's about the art of asking questions and creating answers that you otherwise never would get from a client.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there with the needs and solving those needs and solving problems. That's what sticks. That's what builds a career. That's what builds a family doing business with you throughout their family. That's what builds referrals from that family and their friends, is when you've solved real problems that they're dealing with.
Yep.
Hey, your book spends a lot of time on the importance of specialization as a way to avoid irrelevance. How does someone who's been at this 20 or maybe even 30 years, a veteran in the industry, how do they take that idea of, wow, now I've got to specialize in this field that's changing so rapidly? How do we make that work mid-career?
Well, I hate to be so historical, but to answer that question, I go back to when I came in the business. I came in right out of college at a huge agency, Equitable in Detroit, their #1 agency with over 100 producers. And about 40 of those producers were either my age or between your age and my age, let's put it that way. And I learned to do something called joint work that taught me to do things like defined benefit pension plans, which is a highly specialized area, estate planning. We were very big on group insurance. We used to cold canvas businesses in Detroit and say, we'd like to quote your group insurance. That was the way to get in the door. And then you could talk about key man or whatever. But my mentor used to say, this business is caught, not taught. And the challenge that we face today is there aren't a lot of teachers. So one reason I formed Financial Strategies Network, not to plug it, but I am, is because I know a handful of people that are my age that have been masterful, one of them being Rao Garuda, who co-authored this book with me. Rao's in his mid-70s and came to this country with $7 in his pocket. And, as they say, the rest is history. He's a remarkable man. And he's taught me a lot. And he's available to teach anyone if they'll just give him a phone call. And so I think we have to learn from those who've walked before us. And specialization doesn't mean that you have to be a jack of all trades. What it means is you should have a virtual family office. You should, in our case, we have a faculty. Again, that's Financial Strategies Network, but there are other groups out there that are just as good, where there's someone that specializes in ESOPs, for example, which we have. And that's a very, very wonderful opportunity that few people understand. But I'll be darned if I'm going to ever learn how to do an ESOP when I've got the best guy in the country in my Rolodex. Then specialties in things like reverse mortgages, which we don't even get paid on, but they're a tremendous opportunity in this climate for tax-free money for people so that they don't pull money out of their portfolio when it's down, because you'll never recover it. If you beat your portfolio up when it's down, you're really going to lose money.
Boy, that's for sure. So what I'm hearing there is multiple disciplinary practices working together and allowing their specialization and expertise to serve the client so that you can align with other experts. That, I think, is a clever idea. And in fact, of the top producers I've ever seen, they've always had deep, solid relationships with other experts who they could trust. So developing those relationships is of primary importance if you're going to be in the business long term.
Yep.
So we're coming out of this environment that we've been hunkered down. In fact, we could do this video face to face, except we're facing the dreaded COVID-19 virus. People are scared. Some people aren't. My state is barely beginning to open up. I live in Arizona, where it's sunny and warm, and we've had a very low incident level of this virus. But as the country is changing its practices and the standards on what it means to be safe, what are the areas of specialization that you feel are especially attractive as we come out of the bunker, as you call it, after this COVID war?
Well, I don't know if I said this in a previous interview, but I think it was just a couple of days ago. A 31-year member of the top of the table called me, and he calls me his mentor. I think he's more my mentor. But he said, what are we going to do when we come out of the bunker? And I said, well, think of ourselves in the bunker with bombs bursting in air. And what we have to ask ourselves when we come out is, will our flag still be there? It's that scary. So what it means more than anything else is you got to get back on track, but not the same track. If you go back to doing the same old, it's not going to work. You have to reinvent yourself. We all have to reinvent ourselves. And one thing is, as I did say in a previous interview, that the first time we've ever had a financial calamity that they can't blame the financial advisors for. Clients are going to be happy to hear from us, and they're bewildered. And so I would say the answer is taxes, taxes, and taxes. That's the biggest threat that we're facing going forward. And so tax advantage products like annuities, like life insurance, like reverse mortgages, even though you don't get paid on them, it generates premiums for things like long-term care. You have to think outside of the box, because there's not a whole lot to go back and talk about if you don't have some new ideas. And my feeling, I'm very involved in the area of life settlements, because I'm I think the best person in the country. And it's like so many things that get abused and misused and misunderstood. And then if you're lucky as I am, you wind up knowing the person who does it right. He's telling agents that they can go back and ask clients if they have parents who are living, and what's their financial situation. And people are scrambling for money, older people, to take out of their life insurance policies. Cashing it in may be the worst choice for its salvage value. And then, there's obviously other opportunities that revolve around long-term care. But I think just to cut to the quick, we're in the assurance business, assurance with an A, where people are supposed to be comfortable and feel safe. That's what we sell. We don't sell speculation or numbers or projections, or at least we shouldn't. So we've got a lot of people looking for a safe harbor, and we've got it in our products and everything we've sold our whole life. We just have to go back to basic needs-based selling and security, because people are more motivated, as we all know, by fear than they are by greed. And if we go back to that, I think we'll be fine, and so will our clients.
Yeah, I think that's great. I remember I wrote an article probably 12 years ago that was about the big challenges to a successful and enjoyable retirement. And one was making sure your money lasted as long as you do.
Yeah.
That you want to earn more money, but it would rush you into the stock market, and then the volatility could consume you alive, which we've seen recently. About every 10 years now, it seems to happen, where volatility gets so out of control that it heads heavily down. And so you've got the low yields that are your other alternative, where you say, well, I want to be safe, and you get next to nothing for your money. And you would have thought, between 12 and 10 years ago, maybe things have changed, but they're really worse. The market's more volatile than it's ever been. Interest rates are lower than ever before. We're living longer, and we're probably going to have to pay more taxes down the road because of all the money our government spends. So those principles are there for us to use, in safety, security, tax advantages, using people's life expectancy, harvesting wealth that they have within their assets, including their life insurance policies. All these are going to be continually popular ideas when we expose them to the people that have those needs.
Those are great points, Andy. The affluent retired person or about to retire person has a target on their back. I mean, there is now going to be about a 30 some odd $trillion national debt. And the only other number that's as big as that in our economy is the 28 or so trillion dollars in private retirement plans and pensions and IRAs, et cetera. So it isn't hard to figure one's an asset, the other's a liability. The government's got to do something. And the best thing we can do, my mission would be where 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, whatever, is go get my clients out of taxable assets that you either want something lightly taxed, that's one of my friend's best terms, lightly taxed like an annuity or like a split dollar life insurance policy or tax-free. That's the future of our business for as long as I can see, as far as I can see.
So in your book, you also talk about the process of discovery with a client, and some people use the term fact finding, but I think you try to draw a line there between discovery and fact finding. What's the difference there?
Fact finding is what you do when you say, boy, I use this financial planning tool called eMoney Advisors or whatever it might be. And they ask all these great questions and then they feed it into the computer and it gives a response. Fact finding is gathering data. Discovery is gathering information about feelings, emotions, ambitions, and objectives. And it's very different. Example I'd like to give is you can go talk to a business owner and ask him a few questions about his business. But the real question that you're not going to get with a fact finder is, Andy, when you wake up at 2 a.m. and are staring at the ceiling, what is it about your business that keeps you awake? Fact finding would be asking Andy, you're married, how many children do you have? Discovery would be, Andy, is your current wife the mother of your children? That's not an easy question, but it's a damned important one. Then you'd say, well, my kids are 34, 30, and 28. And the fact finder continues, okay, and that's good. Discovery is finding out the daughter who's in her 30s is a history teacher. The son that's in his early 30s is in the business and busting his chops, making his dad's business grow. And the youngest one lays on the couch at home smoking pot. And when dad dies, and the middle child has tripled the value of the business, which I've had a bunch of examples of that. How does it work when the other two come and want their share? That's discovered, because that is a mess. And he's going to say, wait a minute, I tripled the business and now that it's 3 sizes bigger than it was when I got it. And now I've got 2 siblings. So I'm going to be right back where I was 20 years ago when I took over the business from dad. That's discovery.
I remember talking with some people who I thought were good at discovery too. And when they would look at those fact-finding sheets, and they would always spend time to even alter the way those sheets work or have an accompanying piece where you could talk about different things. It could be any type of financial product, annuity, mutual fund, maybe they're in a hedge fund, they're a sophisticated investor, whatever the case may be, but asking them what they have, getting the data down, and then asking them, do they understand how that particular financial product works? And would they like more information about how it works? And how do they feel about how it works?
Absolutely.
Like that the market will grow my money, but I don't like that I can wake up in the morning and see a 25% drop because of a virus. Those things become much more than just pieces of data. And now I'm starting to get to my risk tolerance level and what I'm really comfortable with. And I remember another time I was helping an agent, and he brought in a client, a very nice lady, and and we were talking about volatility, and she was looking at her, at the time it was in a mutual fund, watching her account fall during a market collapse, and she was in tears. She was crying. And I said to her, I said, Susan, the fact that you're crying about this tells me that we've far exceeded your risk tolerance in this particular case. And so sadly, the data didn't help her because no one really evaluated just how frightening it would be for her if she lost those kind of resources at that time. So I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about your co-author, Rao, and his work. And I know he's adamant about the importance of charging fees when you're giving advice. What can you tell us about his views on that?
Well, I think he's the master of it. He determined when he came to the United States, he got a graduate degree in engineering, but wound up in the insurance business. And his wife was a doctor, so naturally the doctor market was natural to him. And of course, God bless the Indian people. Without them, we'd be very short on doctors. I think 3 out of my 4 physicians I go to are, I think 2 are doctors and 1 is Iranian Persian. But so he's done huge in that market, but every market. I mean, he has clients from all walks of life. And he found that because he was very vigilant and detailed, because he was trained as an engineer, he would really work on a proposal and just, cross the T's and dot the I's and really deliver a product, not the insurance product, but the product was the plan. And then if people looked at it and called their brother-in-law or something and did it with him, that didn't make Rao very happy. So he concluded that he should charge a fee. Typically it's $5,000, but he's gone as far as $100,000. And he basically says, if you're willing to write a check for $5,000, I'll go to work for you. And interestingly enough, in the medical market, when the doctors protest, as most people do sometimes with a fee, he says to them, well, let me ask you a question. Somebody comes to you with, a pain in their left side and a bad headache, and you have to do blood work, you have to examine them, you have to send tests out, and then you come back with your recommendation. Do you do all of that for free and then they either take your recommendation? That's how he nails it with them. And oh yeah, now I get it. Here's the $5,000. But the real thing is engagement. They have skin in the game. I learned a long time ago that people, once they make a purchase, they defend their purchase, and they will defend the idea that they've engaged this person to do their planning. So they're not going to shop you. They're not going to go around you. They're not going to listen to somebody else because they already paid $5,000. They're getting the best guy around. So it makes his closing ratio amazing. And I can't say enough about fees. We spend a lot of time on it in the book. And if you come to one of our events, which are going to be virtual now, you'll hear Rao pound on it. But he never makes an exception to that rule. And it has served him well.
It's interesting. It makes me think, I haven't personally had to work with attorneys as a customer of one too often, but I've never heard about anyone asking them for a refund. It's very rare. So working as a professional and charging for your services is something that not every advisor is accustomed to, although that's becoming much more of mainstream in America with the large expansion of registered investment advisors across the country. So we're seeing the customer really adopt that as well, right along with everybody else.
Yeah, that's where we're going.
As you go to work with self-employed professionals like doctors or lawyers or other types of professional advisors, how do you suggest an agent or someone who wants to become an advisor themselves penetrate that market space?
Well, there is no question the most target-rich market in America is the self-employed business person or the business owner who has partners, and basically non-publicly traded companies, of which we know are the backbone of our industry. If we didn't know it, we sure know it now, because they're all getting some reimbursement from the government to try and stay open. And their needs are the same as anyone else's, but the 2 things you have to do is make sure when you do get an appointment with them that it's an uninterrupted appointment, that you ask them to not take calls, etc., which takes a lot of courage, but it's really important. How do you get to see them? Obviously, if you can have a nest among business people, all the things that everybody knows, you go to networking groups. There are a couple of services that are very good. We used one for years called PT Advisors in Pittsburgh. I don't mind plugging them. I don't use them anymore. But, they charge a handsome fee, but they will put you in front of business owners. And so once you're there, then everything matters, because it's the old thing about the first 30 seconds, you lose them. And here's the most helpful thing I can tell everybody listening that is a home run. And nobody does it except the people that I've told it about or trained, I don't think. Today, technology is our friend if we can always be on the right side of it. You always have to have a specialty or a strategy that is out of the reach of technology, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't use technology. And there's this thing called Google that you can Google that person and their business and dig. If you really want to dig, I mean, you don't just get you got to know how to dig. But if you dig, I can sit down and say, so Andy, this is quite an operation. I know you took it over from your dad about 15 years ago when he passed. Tell me how a guy with a degree in art history is running a parts and engineering company that makes parts for Boeing aircraft. That's quite a leap. And given the growth that you brought to the company, I really, if you don't mind, like to hear about how that happened. Then you own them. You just shut up. And the other thing you always do with a business owner, always, if they don't do it, you haven't succeeded. Their business is their baby. And if you're done talking to them and you gathered the information, the discovery information, and again, what keeps you awake at 2 a.m. about your business, they'll always say, come on in the back room, let me show you around. I can't tell you how many times I've done that. And if they don't do it, you might ask for it, but let them show you around their baby, because they are, here's the big machine we just brought that does this and this, costs us $800,000, but it's paying for itself. Again, shut up and listen. And we've done that with my former business partner. We do the tour, and then the next thing we know, the guy's ordering lunch for us, and we're going to stay with him. So again, it's relationships, it's information. You got to have the information, but if you can't crack the nut, I call these things, just one more thing and I'll shut up. I call them icebreakers. You need icebreakers with people. When you get an appointment with a business owner, if somebody set it up for you, like PT Marketing, they forgot why the hell you're even there. You walk in and why did I give you the appointment? So you got to be able to say something that breaks the ice. And the question that I just mentioned, or you were an Eagle Scout. I was an Eagle Scout too. You like baseball. I noticed on the wall. So those are the icebreakers. You got to have icebreakers, and you got to build the rapport. Forget about the facts, because they won't matter unless you do those things.
Yeah, and you only have a little bit of time in the world with each person. It's really a precious commodity. And it makes me think also about how agents and advisors are using their time. And I know you've got some pretty strong opinions of what sort of platforms an advisor might affiliate with. There's registered investment advisory firms, there's wirehouses, broker dealers, there's independent marketing organizations, field marketing organizations, BGAs. Can you give us some of your thoughts after all this experience you've had about what we might need to look out for as advisors in the future, understanding that things are changing, technology's changing, we've had this virus thrown in our face. What advice can you give us to properly use our time and to select the right business partners who support us?
Well, like selling, a lot of it has to do with chemistry. I think the most important thing is the person at the head of the organization. That's why I like IMOs, BGAs, agency managers. I used to be one, because the buck stopped with them. There was a problem with the carrier or whatever, they took the heat. And so, I like the Warren Buffett rule. He once was asked, what's the most important thing when he considers investing in a company. And he says, well, it's not the balance sheet. It's not the industry. It's not the profits. It's not the cash flow. It's one thing. It says it's the CEO. And I have three questions. Do I like him or her? Do I trust him or her? And do I respect him or her? So like, trust, and respect. It's hard to put emotion in an institution. Institutions don't have like, trust, and respect. It's not that they're untrustable, unlikable, or disrespectful. It's not in their DNA. So you've got to start with the person, which means a marketing organization, somebody who's been there and done it. I'm very down, as you probably know, on the large financial institutions, whether they're insurance companies, big broker dealers, or providers, product providers, the Fidelities, etc. I'm down on them, not because I blame them, but I understand them because I've been behind the curtain, as you know. They're scrambling right now at their board meetings about this virus situation. And the one thing they aren't talking about are their producers. They're talking about their shareholders, their profitability. What are we going to do when we come out of the bunker? And rightly so, their customer, their ultimate customer. But we are more than ever before. It's been happening gradually since I came in the business, where we saluted the flag of the company, and we bled Equitable Blue or Connecticut General Blue, and they respected us for that and rewarded us. Today we are on our own, and no one has our back, and I don't blame them a bit. They've got their own problems, but we have to be very careful who we trust. And to me, it's all about the person that is my mentor relationship, a person like you who obviously has had tons of relationships with great producers. That's my advice.
I think it's a good piece of advice. Do you like who you work with? Do you trust who you work with? Do you respect who you work with? Sometimes it's hard to find someone that can check all three boxes. And I think that's a great way to begin evaluating who you're going to rely on as you begin serving your customers.
Well, so, I can tell you this, every time I was 2 out of 3, I got really badly burned. So you got to check all 3 boxes.
Yeah, as try as we might, we can never get away from the old 3-legged stool. And those are the 3 legs of a good relationship.
Yep.
If you don't have it, you're going to be doing the balancing act instead of them. So you've really grown over the years from being in the field, moving into management, creating businesses, running entire insurance companies. And I bet you've experienced a lot of regulation along the way and the changes that are happening. And I know your book points to the future in thinking about things like the best interests of the client and mandates on those topics. Where do you see us heading? Give us your vision of the future.
One of my lifelong mentees is a great student of the industry, even more so than me. I guess I taught him some of that. His name is Jerry Vander Zanden, and he works for a big IMO now. And he always says, anyone who's doing business 5 years from today, the way they're doing business today, will be out of business. That has never been truer than today. We are faced with a regulatory environment. Those of us that remember taking our first Series 7 or whatever, learning what an SRO is. Well, that's a self-regulating organization. That means they work for us. Well, I deregistered, so I can say FINRA is not acting in our best behavior, our best interest. I'm sorry. They've become their own juggernaut. I'd liken it to the fact that the founding fathers created a federal government that government worked for them. It was just a way to centralize certain things that had to be centralized. Now it's quite different. And FINRA is sort of like that. And that's why some of my mentees and best friends have deregistered and become IRAs or RIAs. The other thing that's really important to understand is that the regulators have made the conclusion that we are all fiduciaries. This DOL thing last year that everybody was buckling down for, and then it blew up. It didn't blow up. When the companies are all preparing to make everybody a fiduciary, you can't unring that bell. A plaintiff lawyer is going to say, wait a minute, Andy, the company you represent has a stack of material that says you're a fiduciary. It's maybe in their storage bin now, but they decided you were, and so did the government. And so the first thing you got to remember is no matter what you think, you are a fiduciary. And then the second thing that you bring up is the regulators come up with the most plaintiff lawyer favored ideas that I can imagine, like best interest. What on earth, how could you come up with a more nebulous term than best interest? How can you argue that something was in somebody's best interest 10 years later? It's an invitation for lawsuits. And so the best interest rule is, we used to have the prudent man rule. Okay, that had some parameters to it. What would a prudent man do? But best interest, I just find it unbelievable that we're being held to that standard when no one knows the answer to that question, and it clearly changes over time. So, I guess what I'm saying is, again, we're on our own. We have to be really careful. I don't think we're going to get much help from the financial institutions. And so the more independent you can be, the better you are.
I think that's sobering, but it's the reality. I have seen, and I believe that this is the right path, is to do plenty of documentation. The process of discovery that you talk about requires that one not only collect data, but also the qualitative information that runs along with it. How did the client feel about it? Is there something that they love about it? Is there something that scares them about it? These are the sorts of things that can really tip the scales towards giving best interest advice. The other thing I think is to look at the practices of others in the field so that you're on par or exceeding the other folks' activity levels. So that's talking really about benchmarking. If you're at the same level that people are providing at the time in the prevailing market, then you can be working in the best interest. But it is a moving target and a challenge for everyone that's in the financial service industry. That's not going to go away. And I think this leads me to my final question, Gary. As you head into your own interviews, we've talked now 3 times you've been on the hot seat, and I've gotten more and more information from you. And I know you have others that you're going to interview to share their ideas, strategies, concepts, and beliefs that have driven them to higher and higher levels of success. So tell us your vision for your upcoming interviews. I want to hear about that.
Well, I'm not going to name who I'm going to interview because some of them don't know it yet, but I don't think any of them will turn me down. But I want to look at, as you can tell, I like looking at the whole picture. To me, the most important word in the English language is perspective. And if ever we needed to have perspective, it's now. You've got to see the whole circumstance we're in to navigate your way out of it. So first, of course, I'm going to talk to some of my top of the table friends who have been around long enough that they saw the crash of '86, they saw the crash of '01, they saw the crash of '08. None of them is as cataclysmic as this, in my opinion, but they were pretty rough. And we all were through that. So we're the survivors of some pretty tough times. And I have about 4 top of the table people I've known through all of those periods. And I want to hear what their plan is. I want to hear what their thinking is. Everyone knows mine now. You've had 3 interviews. I want to hear what they have to say. Then I want to look behind the curtain and talk to maybe 2 or 3 retired executives who are my age, who don't have to speak the company line, because you're never going to get a straight answer from somebody being interviewed who's still employed by the company. It's kind of silly when they do that because it's all rote and very measured. And again, I used to do it. We used to do road shows to raise money. at Protective Life. And we were so scripted, and if I went off script, I got beat up on the jet on the way home, you know. So I'd like to talk to some people who've been through it, but are now have no skin in the game. And then probably some people I know that are on the fringes of the industry, like have done investing and actuarial work. So I want to try and create a whole picture so that everyone can make an informed decision, which is one of the things that we repeat again and again in our book. We want the consumer to make an informed decision. I think that producers, whether you're a financial planner, an annuity salesperson, life doesn't matter, you've got an informed decision you need to make, and you need to make it pretty quick. Now's a good time. You're in the bunker. You got time to think about it. But you got to come out swinging, and it can't be on the old track.
Yeah, that's right. So this is a great time. I'm really going to work hard to get this video message out as quickly as possible with Gary's help. His program is called Gary Schulte's Access to Excellence. And I think it will be a deep resource that advisors in many different areas of the financial services industry will be able to use to grasp life-giving concepts that will keep your business thriving for many decades, just like Gary's business has thrived for many decades. So Gary, thank you so much for sharing this with us. I look forward to watching your program spread across the country and thousands of agents subscribe to it.
Thank you, Andy. And I only wish I was as good an interviewer as you are, because these things would be even better. But I'm going to do my best to copy your style, okay?
I think you'll do fine. Have a great time, and thanks for everybody for tuning in.
Thank you, Andy.